Hi, Peter. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. It's so great to connect for a number of reasons, but one of those is that we share a lot of overlapping interests. So I'm looking forward to chatting today.
Thank you, Nate. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast with you.
As you think back on the things you've learned from your research, what have you learned that you would most want to pass on to others?
I think one of the best ways to share that lesson, or to answer that question, is to start with the journey that I took as a basis for reaching this kind of conclusion.
Right?
So, if I were to explain where how I got to where I am. It probably the journey probably starts with my first years as a doctoral student. And so I started at a doctoral program that was really one of the best in the country with some amazing scholars. And I respected them immensely. I learned a lot from them. But one of the things I struggled with was that I couldn't see myself doing exactly the kind of work that they were doing. They were, each entrenched in a particular area of study. And there were aspects of what they were doing that I found very interesting, but it, I struggled with trying to slot myself in that line of research. And it really didn't matter which of the faculty I was thinking about. So what I did was start collaborating with a number of faculty based on threads that I had, an interest in that they were pursuing, and it was really an interesting challenge in the sense that because I didn't fit entirely within their research program, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to frame my interests in a way that would connect with the work of others. And ultimately, the situation sort of led to me having a variety of different projects that on the surface seemed very different. And it was something that, as an assistant professor, once I graduated and started to think about, okay, how do I define myself in my career? I needed to make sense of these projects. And especially because, when we write our tenure packets, they are often expecting us to come up with an overall theme. And one of the things that I did over the years as I was getting closer to tenure is trying to figure out, well, why are these things like, why did I pursue these different projects? Because each one I was very interested in at the time. And it really took me a few years to figure it out. And what I figured out was that there was a broad theme that connected all of it. It just wasn't a theme that was uh, an off-the-shelf sort of program that other people had been exploring. And so this took, a process of abduction and induction, and ultimately, arriving at this interest that I have in social misperception, and how these misperceptions arise and how you can address those perceptions because they have real implications for how we interact with one another. And if I were to think back about to why I have this interest, well, it probably stems from my very early formative experiences as a kid, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood every few years. Uh, One distinction in my life is that I hadn't lived for more than 4 years in one area. So I was always moving into new communities and dealing with this issue. How do you manage these social perceptions and misperceptions? When they have very little information about you and are forming stereotypes and treating you based on those stereotypes. So that was the genesis of my interest, but it didn't become clear until years later, right? And so, um, but what I gleaned from that experience and where I am now in my career is this idea that like I had this inner voice that was guiding me to the kind of work I was doing. It wasn't clear what it was telling me for quite some time. But once I identified that inner voice, it all made sense. And I can see both the challenges it created and also the enormous benefits because the challenges with that kind of approach, which is a non-traditional approach to pursuing a research career, I would imagine, relative to those that already know they want to, do research in a well-established line of inquiry, is that you don't have a home right away. You don't have an intellectual home. The benefits, though, are that you are able to construct a home in a way that really suits you, and it really allows for a kind of research that you can pursue that really that you can find most energizing. And and I think this theme of like, identifying that inner voice and listening to your inner voice is a theme that has stuck with me ever since tenure. It's something I still sort of revisit now because it is a signpost that helps me sort of make really important decisions in my life and choose projects and questions and all of that in a way where I feel like I have a North Star, even when the horizon's a little foggy, right? And it's that same sort of lesson that I see outside of academia as well. Like, for example, um, like my wife, for example, has probably had 5 or 6 different careers in her working life. And they may have seemed very disconnected, but it's only now that the connections, the through line is becoming clear. She's an interior architect at this point, and she runs her own business. Before then, she was, an art director at an ad firm. She was designing shoes. She was a food stylist, and all these different kinds of jobs may appear on the surface like they're disconnected, but they were connected in ways that have prepared her to do the kind of job that she's doing now, that a more traditional path wouldn't have allowed. And I see this again and again, like the people in my life who have navigated these choices. A good friend of mine who he was an editor for films. He was a filmmaker for a while, and you would think that this was like a really satisfying uh, profession. He was miserable for many, many years, working terrible hours. And it's only after he left that field and basically got into property management. He has a few rental properties and he basically maintains those properties. I've never seen him happier. And it's something that he only allowed himself to do now after having tried these, more established paths that he has the luxury of doing that now. But again, with him, this was something that he can share stories with me about these formative experiences with his father that led him to think that this is something that he could never do. And so he feels this enormous sense of accomplishment in something that, is really right for him. So that's the broad lesson I would share. It's something that is very important for me, and it's something that I find an important reminder when I make all sorts of decisions in my life.
This connects with me in lots of ways for lots of reasons. As I look at your CV, Peter, it reminds me so much of mine because I've got research in overconfidence and I've got research in voice and I've got research in group decision making and I'm doing stuff on gender bias and ethics and humor. And when years ago I was talking to Adam Galinsky, professor at Columbia, and we were trying to like craft like who am I as a researcher? Because I didn't know. I was just like I was chasing all these things that to me were interesting, but I couldn't find the common thread either. And he said, it seems to me like you research social perception. And when I look at you and I hear you talk about you researching social misperception, that caught my eye right away because like, oh, I wonder if it's similar where this is the kind of the larger umbrella, which maybe to an outsider that just seems like a normal topic, but to insiders, this isn't like a clearly defined research program like trust or like overconfidence. And so I can connect with this so much. And um I've had numerous careers like your wife and even this podcast, in some ways this is a little bit out there, but ultimately I think it just comes back to like I want to learn and I'm curious. And there have been times where I've just listened to the inner voice, even though it might not make sense outside looking in and there's not necessarily a clear kind of finish line or, overarching goal. But in hindsight, I feel like it's all, as time goes on, I feel like it's all working together.
I love that experience of yours, and I agree. It does resonate with what I've been noticing. In terms of the journeys that I've seen in people that are close to me, my friends and family, and so on. I think the challenge with that lesson. So, like on the one hand, it seems like a simple lesson. But the challenge with it is that it's really hard to follow because it is a rougher road. The easier road is following the established path. And there's so many, uh, you know, uh, so many people around us who seem very comfortable following that path. And for some, that might indeed be the right path for them. So there may be a nice match between what they're called to do and what the options are. For us, I think when we are in this situation where none of the well-established paths are right for us, and we have to construct it on our own, that can be scary, and it can be anxiety provoking at the time. But I think for me, what's clear is that it has ultimately paid some enormous dividends in terms of allowing me to live a life and have a career that I find maximally fulfilling.
Yeah, I think of my dad. My dad worked at the same law firm for 30 plus years. And for him, that was great and it worked. And that's just not been my experience. And I think there are a number of people out there who the traditional, well-trodden path is not right for them. And so I love this lesson. I think it's inspiring, encouraging, maybe bring some comfort to people who are kind of listening to that inner voice, even when it's guiding them in what looks like maybe a windy road. Any final things you'd like to share, Peter, as we wrap up here?
Well, I would say that, that challenge of listening to that voice never ends. And so, we frame this very much as a matter of making these choices early on in your career. But uh, that same question is looming for me it has been looming for me at every stage of my career. And even now, I think about, okay, how many productive years do I have left in this career as, senior scholar? There's always this question. And what I will say is that at every stage, there has been an adjustment. And the adjustment is something that may not have always followed the traditional path. And the other thing is that everyone in this career ultimately has the choice to make those adjustments in very different ways. And so that's one of the great things that I've seen in at the senior level where some people decide to go into administration. Others decide to go into, being an editor for a journal or two. And others, write books or whatever, or stick with the same research path or some combination. And I think the last last parting words I would offer is that you can pursue any combination uh, you want, and in a way that really sort of fits with what your inner voice is telling you, including having this podcast.
Well, having graduated from a business school, worked in sales, did work in sports and broadcasting and medicine and real estate, going back to law school in my 30s, PhD, postdoc. That was all before getting to, kind of like my research ideas and topics, which are kind of all over the place, which yeah, I guess it should not be a surprise given my history. But it's good to know that, or maybe it's good to know, and I can plan for and expect that the inner voice will never stop speaking, as you so clearly stated. And I love this lesson, Peter. I think this is, again, inspirational and insightful. So thank you so much for sharing this lesson today.
You're welcome, Nate. It was great chatting with you.